They laughed about money they thought would pass through me at Dorothy Halloway's funeral. It was a Thursday afternoon in the Fellowship Hall at St. Bridget S., the kind of room that always smelled faintly of floor polish beneath the wilted lilies. Coffee sat in metal urns, already bitter from being reheated too many times. Neighbors stood in small knots near the refreshment table, speaking in that careful half-voice people use when grief has an audience. I sat alone beside Dorothy's framed photos, my black gloves folded in my lap, my purse hooked tight around my wrist like an anchor. Across the room, my daughter, Lisa, and her husband, Mark, moved from group to group with practiced smiles, thanking people, squeezing shoulders, collecting sympathy like it was currency. Dorothy had lived next door to me for 37 years. We had traded garden cuttings over the back fence and watched each other's mail when one of us traveled. She wasn't blood, but she was the kind of neighbor who became family by repetition. Mark leaned toward a cluster of people by the guest book, and he didn't lower his voice nearly enough. If you've ever felt someone measuring your life in dollars, you know the chill that follows. If you've ever felt someone measuring your life in dollars, you know the chill that follows. Stay with me, because I remembered every word. And if stories like this matter to you, do me a small favor. Tap like so, this reaches the people who need it. Then tell me in the comments, have you ever had family treat help like a leash? We should stay close to Margaret. Dorothy's got no family left. And honestly, we're next in line for her $5 million. The joke hurt because it wasn't really a joke. For 3 years, Mark and Lisa had been positioning themselves as my caretakers, my financial advisors, my inevitable heirs. What began as temporary help after Robert's death turned into a permanent arrangement I never quite agreed to, one polite yes at a time. Robert died on a Tuesday in February. I still remembered the sound of the hospital phone ringing at 5:12 a.m., the way my hands shook so hard I couldn't hold the receiver steady. By the following Monday, Lisa sat at my kitchen table with a stack of paper and that careful, concerned expression she had perfected since marrying Mark. "Mom, you can't handle all this alone," she said, spreading out bank statements like a deck of cards. "Dad took care of everything. You don't even know how to pay bills online." I had balanced checkbooks since before she was born. I knew the difference between a debit and a credit, knew how to reconcile down to the last dollar. But grief made you second-guess your own competence. When someone offered to help carry the load, you said yes. When they offered to take over completely, you should have said no. I said yes anyway. Mark needed a quiet place to work, so he moved their computer into my dining room that first week, just temporarily, he assured me, while they helped organize Robert's affairs. The temporary computer became a permanent office. The dining room table where Robert and I had spent 42 years eating dinner became Mark's desk, covered in folders, sticky notes, and passwords written on yellow legal pads. At first, Lisa stayed over a few nights, so you wouldn't be alone. Then Mark started staying too, 1 week, then 2. Their coats lived on my hallway hooks. Their shoes lined up by my back door. It was never announced as moving in. It was simply happening, quietly, like moss growing on a stone. The bills started arriving at their house instead of mine. "Efficiency," Mark said. "You'll just get stressed out seeing all the due dates." The mortgage company updated their records. The utilities updated theirs. The credit card companies followed suit. Within 6 months, my mail consisted mostly of grocery circulars and medical appointment reminders, anything that couldn't be used to control me. 3 years of my kindness cost me everything. The real theft wasn't the forwarded mail or the paid bills. It was subtler than that. Mark had a gift for turning reasonable requests into unreasonable realities. "Could I add my name to the checking account?" he asked one evening, "just in case you have a medical emergency?" Could Lisa be listed as a backup contact on your investments? Could we keep copies of your important documents since you've been forgetful? I wasn't getting more forgetful. I was getting more isolated. Robert had been careful, the kind of man who labeled everything in neat block letters. My own, he used to say when he locked the file cabinet. My own papers, my own decisions. After he died, I found his safe deposit key taped inside an old Christmas card in his desk drawer, with a note in his handwriting. Keep this separate. I slipped it onto my own keyring and told myself I was honoring him. I didn't realize how quickly separate would become taken. The Bank of Millfield had been my financial home for 35 years. Tom Morrison, the branch manager, had approved my first car loan back in 1987. His daughter Sarah used to handle my savings account and ask after my garden club like it was part of the paperwork. Then one afternoon, my statement arrived late. I called the bank the way I always had. Sarah answered, but she didn't greet me by name. I'm sorry, she said politely, with that careful customer service tone. But Mr. Keller handles the Mitchell account now. Would you like me to transfer you to him? Mr. Keller was Mark. Mark Keller, my son-in-law, who had somehow become the primary contact on accounts Robert and I had held since before Mark was born. The woman who once asked about my tulips was now treating me like a stranger, calling about someone else's money. I hung up without explaining. At 68 years old, I had become a secondary user on my own life savings, an account built deposit by deposit, paycheck by paycheck, over decades of ordinary work and ordinary discipline. My own bank didn't recognize my voice anymore. The gaslighting started small, the way termites start in the walls where you don't look. When I mentioned feeling confused about a transfer, Lisa would exchange a glance with Mark, the look that said, "Mom's getting old." When I asked why I needed so many signatures for simple things, they explained patiently that new banking regulations required extra security for people my age. When I wondered why an investment statement showed a number I didn't recognize, Mark opened a spreadsheet on his laptop and walked me through calculations that always ended with me being wrong. "Mom, you're getting overwhelmed," Lisa would say, her voice gentle but firm. "That's why we're here, to help." Help started feeling less like help the afternoon I found Mark in my bedroom, going through Robert's desk. "Just organizing old files," he said without looking up. Papers were spread across my bed as if my marriage had been emptied into piles. "You've got duplicate insurance policies here. We should consolidate these." They weren't duplicates. One was Robert's life insurance, the policy that had paid out when he died, the money I used for the funeral and planned to keep for emergencies. The other was my own policy, the one I had paid premiums on for 20 years. "I can handle my own insurance," I said. Mark finally looked up, and his expression shifted into that patient smile he wore when explaining why I was wrong about something. "Margaret, these policies overlap in ways that are costing you money." Lisa and I researched it. If we adjust the beneficiaries and combine the coverage, you'll save about $300 a month. $300 a month was real money. It was also my money, my policy, my decision. Yet standing in my own bedroom, watching him handle my husband's papers like they belonged to him, I felt like a child being told how her allowance should be spent. "We just want what's best for you," Lisa said from the doorway. I hadn't heard her come upstairs. She held a grocery bag, the one she brought on her twice-weekly visits, always full of things I apparently needed. Easier to open pill bottles, a large print checkbook, a medical alert bracelet I never asked for. "The insurance agent agrees with us," Mark added. Mrs. Peterson down the street went through the same thing when her husband passed. Simplified everything. Mrs. Peterson, so they'd been talking to neighbors. comparing me to other widows, discussing my policies like community gossip. "You're being paranoid about money, Mom," Lisa said quietly. "Dad's death was traumatic. It's normal to feel protective, but we're family. We're trying to help you avoid mistakes." Paranoid. The word hung between us like smoke. I wasn't paranoid about my money. I was protective of it. There was a difference. But when your own daughter used words like paranoid and mistakes, you started wondering if maybe you really were losing your grip. I let them take the policies that day. I signed the papers Mark prepared. I agreed to the beneficiary adjustments that would make everything simpler, more efficient, more modern. That night, alone in my kitchen, I realized the truth I didn't want to say out loud. They weren't protecting me from mistakes. They were protecting themselves from me changing my mind. "Mom, you're being paranoid about money." Dorothy's funeral was on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the papers were on my kitchen table. They sat beside my coffee cup as if they belonged there. 3 neat stacks, each one flagged with yellow sticky notes that said "Sign here in Mark Square, confident handwriting, power of attorney, healthcare directive, beneficiary updates." The kind of paperwork that normally took weeks and a lawyer you chose yourself, somehow appearing overnight like a magic trick performed while I slept. Lisa was already in my kitchen, scrambling eggs like she lived there. She'd been doing that more often lately, arriving early with her key, humming to herself, moving around my counters as if they were shared property. "We brought these by last night, but you were already asleep," she said, not looking up. Mark thought it would be good to handle this while yesterday is still fresh in your mind. Ense. Yesterday, Dorothy's funeral. The day Mark had joked, in front of half the town, that he and Lisa were next in line for money that wasn't his. "I don't remember asking for any of this," I said, lifting the top page. The power of attorney form was already filled out. My name typed where it belonged. Mark Keller typed where he definitely did not. Listed as my attorney in fact, the person who could sign in my place, move my money, speak for my best interests. At the bottom, a blank line waited for my signature. Another blank line waited for a notary. Mark came in carrying a briefcase, like my kitchen table was a conference room. He set it down carefully, clicked it open, and slid a pen toward me, as if he were doing me a favor. "Mom, after watching what happened with Dorothy's estate," Lisa began, "we realized how important it is to have things in order." Mark nodded. Dorothy didn't have proper documentation. No one could access her accounts for weeks. Bills piled up. The house almost went into foreclosure before her nephew got it sorted. I knew Dorothy's situation better than they did. 6 months earlier, she'd sat across from me at my own table, tapping her folder and saying, "Everything's labeled, everything's filed, my own." She'd been meticulous. If the bank had delayed anything, it would have been because someone at the bank was doing their job. "Dorothy had everything in order," I said. "Her nephew told me the bank was just being cautious because of the amounts." Mark's smile tightened. "Margaret, with respect, you might have misunderstood. These things are complicated." Complicated. That word was one of his tools. He used it the way some people used erased voice, to make you step back. "That's why we consulted with our attorney," he added, as if that settled it. He said the cleanest approach is to get these signed now. 48 hours would be ideal. You don't want to be dealing with this while you're emotional. Our attorney, not my attorney, a man I had never met, advising on my life from the other side of a conversation I hadn't been allowed to join. Mark tapped the POA page with the tip of his pen. "This is just a precaution. If you had a fall, if you ended up in the hospital, we could pay your bills without delays. You told us you wanted less stress." Less stress. That had been true 3 years ago when grief made everything heavy. But stress and surrender were not the same thing, I stared at the filled-in lines, at his name, printed so neatly it looked permanent, at my empty signature line, waiting. The papers appeared the morning after the service. Over the weekend, the pressure shifted from documents to strategy. Saturday morning, Mark arrived with his laptop, a folder of printouts, and that same calm certainty he wore when he spoke for me at the bank. "I've been analyzing your portfolio," he announced, spreading statements across the dining room table he'd claimed as his office. "With current conditions, we need to make some strategic moves." He used a yellow highlighter like a stage prop. Numbers circled, percentages underlined, arrows drawn from one account to another, as if my savings were a puzzle he could rearrange until it formed his preferred picture. "Your allocation is too conservative for someone your age," he said. "Inflation is eating your returns. If we move some of this into growth positions, you could increase annual return by 4 to 6%. 4 to 6% sounded like a gift until I leaned closer and read the smaller words, variable, market risk, no guarantee. "Who would manage it?" I asked. Lisa, quiet until then, leaned forward as if she'd been waiting for her part. "We've been talking to a firm that specializes in estate planning and wealth transfer. They can handle investments, taxes, and even set up trusts for the kids." For the kids, my grandchildren were 8 and 11. They still believed adults told the truth. Their parents were sitting in my house, planning wealth transfer, like it was a birthday present they'd already wrapped. "I need time," I said. "Of course," Mark replied, but his tone made time sound like a mistake. "Just keep in mind that some opportunities are time-sensitive. Markets don't wait." Neither did predators, I thought, but I didn't say it. I watched him slide papers into new stacks, the way he always did. Create order, create urgency, create the illusion that only he could keep things from falling apart. That evening, he brought up the subject I'd been dreading since Thursday. "We should probably start talking about your will." The words landed heavier than the briefcase had. We were in my living room, the same room where Robert and I had watched 42 years of evening news, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and helped Lisa with homework. Now Mark sat forward in his chair like a man negotiating a contract. "My will is up to date," I said. "When was the last time you reviewed it?" Lisa asked, softening her voice the way she did when she wanted me to feel guilty for disagreeing. "Dad's been gone 3 years. Your circumstances have changed. Your needs have changed." My needs, not my wishes, not my voice. Needs as defined by people who benefited from them. Mark pulled out another folder. Of course he had another folder. "Nothing dramatic," he said. "Just modernizing, current tax laws, current family situation." Current family situation. A son-in-law who joked about inheritances at funerals. A daughter who called me paranoid when I guarded what was mine. "What kind of updates?" I asked, because silence felt like consent in that room. Lisa glanced at Mark for approval, then spoke as if she were presenting a reasonable proposal. "The house, for starters. Right now, it would go through probate when the time comes. That means court fees, delays. It would be simpler if the house transferred directly to us. We're planning to live here anyway, to take care of maintenance, keep it in the family. Planning to live here, in my house, while I was still alive. And your accounts," Mark added smoothly, as if he were reading from a script. "Some still list Robert as primary beneficiary. If something happened to you, they'd go through probate too." If something happened to you, they said it the way people said weather, unavoidable, scheduled, worth preparing for with the right paperwork. "The attorney recommends consolidating everything into a revocable trust," Mark continued. "Lisa and I would be successor trustees. Seamless management, no probate, no delays. No input from me either." I looked around my living room and saw it the way Mark did, as an asset waiting to change hands. I heard the way he spoke, protected, seamless, efficient. and understood what those words really meant. Control. They didn't need me to be dead. They only needed me to sign. And sitting there, listening to them plan my life, like an estate already opened, something inside me stopped trying to be agreeable. I finally saw the game they'd been playing. The Millfield Public Library had computers available for public use. Free internet, no questions asked, no family members hovering behind my shoulder to see what I was learning. I hadn't been inside that building in years, but that Tuesday morning I was there at opening time, choosing a terminal in the far corner where the screen couldn't be casually glanced at. I started with simple searches: financial exploitation, elder financial abuse, power of attorney, revocation. Each new page felt like a light clicking on in a room I'd been stumbling through in the dark. What I read was both comforting and sickening. Comforting because the pattern had a name. Sickening because the pattern was common and it often worked. It worked because it didn't begin with violence. It began with help. It began with someone you loved telling you to stop worrying. By the second day, I wasn't reading out of curiosity anymore. I was reading for tools. I learned that a power of attorney wasn't a crown someone placed on their own head. It was permission I gave, and permission I could take back, as long as I was competent. I learned that banks had special protocols for older customers and unusual account activity, not because they were nosy, but because they were required to be careful. I sat there listening to the library's quiet, the soft clicking of keyboards, the whisper of pages turning, the hum of an old air conditioner, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt private. By Thursday, I found the piece that made my spine straighten, a simple, old-fashioned concept buried beneath modern legal language, a written record, a contemporaneous statement, a way to pin truth to paper before anyone could rewrite it for me. A letter couldn't change a will. It couldn't magically undo a trust, but it could explain intent. It could document pressure. It could lay out timelines and names and exact words before those words became misunderstandings. Some problems required very old-fashioned solutions. Robert had never enjoyed lawyers, but he'd respected preparation. After his heart attack 15 years earlier, he insisted we update everything: wills, beneficiaries, the what-ifs we didn't like talking about. We'd worked with an elder law attorney named Eleanor Hartwell, the kind of woman who didn't smile to soften hard truths. She protected people. That was her job. I looked her up on the library computer. She was still practicing, though her office address had changed to a smaller suite near the courthouse. I didn't call from my house phone. That Thursday morning, I sat in my car in the library parking lot. Engine off, the phone cradled low in my palm, and dialed from my cell. "Mrs. Mitchell," Eleanor said when she answered, her voice warm with recognition. "I was so sorry about Robert. I should have reached out." "Thank you," I managed. "I need to review my estate plan, privately." There was the smallest pause, just long enough for a professional to hear what a spouse hears before you say the rest. "Of course," she said. "Has something changed?" "Yes," I told her, and I didn't elaborate. "I'm receiving financial advice, and I want to make sure my documents protect me." Eleanor didn't ask for gossip. She asked for logistics. We scheduled the appointment for the following Tuesday, at a time I knew Mark would be at his job, and Lisa would be occupied with school drop-offs and after-school routines. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper I tore from a library notepad and folded into my wallet like a secret. I paid her consultation fee in cash. It wasn't dramatic cash, nothing that looked like someone running. It was money I'd pulled out slowly over the last month. $20 here, $40 there, grocery change I didn't redeposit. the kind of small accumulation that didn't draw attention and couldn't be watched on an online dashboard Mark insisted I didn't understand. Eleanor's office was exactly what I needed: a closed door, a quiet clock ticking, and a woman who spoke in clear sentences. She spread my documents across her conference table: my original will, the trust paperwork Robert and I had signed years ago, account summaries I could still get my hands on. "The good news," she said, adjusting her glasses, "is that your original documents are valid and properly executed." Robert was careful. Of course he was. "The bad news," she continued, "is that certain changes you've described, account access modifications, beneficiary updates done under pressure, create vulnerabilities. Not because you did something wrong, because someone else may try to argue later that you didn't understand what you were doing." "Mark wants me to sign power of attorney forms," I said. Even the words felt dirty in my mouth. "He says it's just a precaution." Eleanor didn't react with shock. That alone was an answer. "We can revoke any existing powers of attorney," she said. "And if you choose to execute a new one, we can limit it, narrow it, make it usable only under certain conditions. We also want to protect you from the most common threat: someone claiming you lacked capacity." "How?" I asked. "First," she said, holding up one finger, "we document your capacity now. A formal assessment, not because I think you're impaired, because it prevents a future story being told about you." She held up a second finger. "Second, we create a clean paper trail. You choose your decisions, you state your intent, you keep receipts." Then she leaned back and looked directly at me. "And third, Margaret, we need to consider whether your current structure serves you or serves your heirs." The word heirs landed with quiet weight. Eleanor was diplomatic, but her meaning was unmistakable. Family members who smelled opportunity were not rare. They were a category. I told her about the funeral, about Mark's joke, about the papers on my kitchen table the next morning, already filled out with his name. "Write it down," Eleanor said immediately. "Dates, exact language, who was present. That's evidence of undue influence." Evidence? That was what I'd been missing. Mark's behavior lived in the air, spoken, implied, shrugged off. Eleanor taught me how to pin it down. When I left her office that Tuesday, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steadier, as if someone had finally handed me my own spine back. My husband had been smarter than they knew. The safe deposit box had been Robert's idea, opened 20 years earlier when he started worrying about fires, floods, and people who misplaced important things. Box 247 at the Bank of Millfield, registered in my name only, not shared, not for convenience, just mine. After Robert died, I cleared out most of it. Deeds, originals, the sort of documents you don't leave in a kitchen drawer. But I kept the box. I kept the annual fee on autopay from an account Mark hadn't successfully crawled into yet. I kept the key on my ring, and I kept my mouth shut about it. Now I gave that box a new purpose. That Saturday afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote by hand, not typed, not dictated, handwritten in blue ballpoint ink, the same kind Robert used on anything that mattered. A computer file could disappear. A printed page could be questioned. But handwriting carried breath and hesitation and pressure. It carried personhood. The letter was 3 pages. I documented the last 3 years the way Eleanor told me to, incident by incident, date ranges when I couldn't remember the exact day, and always with the same format: what happened, who said what, who was present. I wrote about the mail forwarding, the bank phone call, the beneficiary simplifications, the insistence that I was paranoid. Then I wrote about Dorothy's funeral, and I quoted Mark as precisely as I could. I listed the people standing near the guest book when he said it. I added details only I would know, not to be dramatic, but to be unmistakable. Robert's middle name, our wedding anniversary, the address of our first apartment, the kind of truths that were impossible to counterfeit without living them. I made copies of the POA documents Mark wanted me to sign, and I wrote notes in the margins. Presented Friday morning, already filled out. Pressure to sign within 48 hours. I slid everything into a legal-size envelope, thick enough to feel real in my hand. On the front, I wrote my name and the date in clear block letters. Not hurried, not shaky. The way I wanted my future self remembered, composed. On the next Tuesday, quiet, ordinary, and deliberately chosen, I went to the Bank of Millfield alone. I presented my ID. I signed the access log. I waited while the employee disappeared behind the heavy door, and I listened to the muted sounds of locks and metal in the back. When the box drawer slid out in front of me, it was cold under my fingertips, a small steel certainty. I placed the envelope in the far corner and tucked it beneath the existing originals like a secret under a Bible. Before I closed the drawer, I filled out a simple instruction card Eleanor had drafted. If anyone attempted unusual account activity, if anyone tried to claim authority over me, if anyone tried to access what wasn't theirs, contact Eleanor Hartwell. Then I slid the drawer back in and watched it lock. The envelope needed only my signature and date. My sister Caroline lived 3 hours away in Riverside, close enough for weekend visits, far enough to give me air. I hadn't been to her house since Robert's funeral, which made my sudden interest in sister time sound normal instead of strategic. I think I need a change of scenery, I told Lisa on Wednesday evening. She was in my kitchen again, turning my spice cabinet into her project. She had jars lined up on the counter, like she was auditioning for control. Oregano froze in her hand halfway between my old shelf and her new one. "That sounds nice, Mom," she said. "Just for the day?" "Actually, I was thinking about staying the weekend. Caroline's been asking me to come see her new garden, and I haven't had a real break in years." Lisa's smile didn't drop, but it tightened. "This weekend, we were planning to finish the estate paperwork on Saturday. Mark has the attorney appointment scheduled." The appointment I hadn't agreed to, the paperwork I hadn't asked for, the decisions they'd already made for me. "The paperwork can wait," I said. "Caroline's 82. I don't get unlimited weekends with her." "Of course," Lisa replied, and I heard the thin edge under the kindness. "Should we reschedule the attorney for next weekend?" "Let's see how I feel when I get back." I packed Friday morning while Lisa was at work, and Mark was in the room he'd turned into his office, the dining room that used to be mine. 2 suitcases for 3 days, my pill organizer, my reading glasses, and my purse with the safe deposit access card Eleanor had told me to keep on my person, not in a drawer. Caroline was delighted when I called, confused too, but delighted. "Stay as long as you want," she said. "Whatever's going on with Lisa and Mark, trust your instincts. You've always been the smart one." I left Millfield at 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. I didn't announce it over breakfast. I didn't give Mark time to suggest a better plan. I texted Lisa when I was already on the highway, on the road. "I'll call when I arrive." They thought they had 72 hours. Caroline's house had one feature that felt like safety: distance from modern monitoring. She had a landline and basic cable, but no internet, and the cell service out there came and went. For the weekend, I would be unreachable unless someone truly needed me, which made Saturday morning's call almost funny. Caroline knocked on my guest room door at 8:30, cordless phone in her hand. "Margaret, it's Lisa. She says it's urgent." "Urgent?" Of course it was urgent. I'd been gone less than 20 hours. "Mom," Lisa said the second I picked up. Her voice was tight, like she was smiling through her teeth. "We need you to come home today." "What's wrong?" I asked. "Is someone hurt?" "No one's hurt. It's your bank accounts." There's a problem. They put holds on things. Mark tried to handle it, but they're saying they need to speak with you directly. Mark tried to handle it. The phrase landed like a confession. What kind of problem? I asked. Mark's voice joined in, and I knew immediately they had me on speaker. This wasn't a conversation. It was a managed situation. Technical difficulties, he said too smoothly. The bank's system is flagging routine transactions. It's probably a glitch, but they need your authorization to clear it up. Which transactions? I asked. A pause, long enough for me to picture them looking at each other. Just some beneficiary updates we discussed, Mark said finally, and the power of attorney authorizations for the estate planning. Nothing dramatic, but the timing is bad because our attorney appointment is Monday morning. Their attorney appointment, their timeline, their urgency. I'm at Caroline's, I said. I'll call the bank on Monday. Mom, this can't wait until Monday, Lisa cut in. Mark's been dealing with this since yesterday evening. The bank is treating him like he's some stranger trying to steal your money. The bank was treating him like someone with ammo out my permission, which was exactly what he was. They're being careful, I said. That's what banks are supposed to do. Mark exhaled hard. I've been helping you with these accounts for 3 years. They have my information on file. This is unnecessary bureaucracy? Unnecessary bureaucracy. That's what people called rules when rules stop them. I'll handle it when I get back, I repeated. After I hung up, Caroline studied me the way our mother used to, quiet, direct, not fooled by soft words. That didn't sound like a glitch, she said. It isn't, I admitted. It's them finding resistance. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but she didn't push. She just made coffee and kept the house calm, like a safe room. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, Lisa sounded different, less controlled, more shaken. They're saying they can't release the holds without in-person verification, she said. They keep repeating the same thing. They need to hear it from you, with your ID. In-person verification, the phrase Eleanor had used. The phrase that meant my bank wouldn't let my son-in-law talk his way into my money. That sounds reasonable, I said. It's not reasonable, Mark snapped, reclaiming the line. They're implying things. They're asking questions about transactions from months ago. Months ago, when he'd first started rearranging my accounts like furniture. What kind of questions? I asked. They want to review authorization, Lisa said, as if the word offended her. They want to know who requested what. They want a meeting. A meeting with witnesses, with notes, with someone on the other side of the desk who didn't care that Mark was family. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I'll be home Sunday, I said. We'll deal with it then. Sunday might be too late, Lisa said quickly. They warned that automatic payments could be affected, mortgage, insurance, credit cards. If something bounces, it could hurt your credit. My credit, my obligations. The very things they'd used to justify taking control. The bank's computers don't take weekends off. And then, in the middle of their panic, Mark let something slip. They said there are special instructions on your account, he said, voice tight. Some kind of flag. That's what's causing all this extra scrutiny. Special instructions. The words on the instruction card in the box. The note Eleanor had helped me add. Quiet, professional, invisible to them until they tried to move. I don't know anything about that, I said, and the lie came out smooth as butter. Maybe it's standard for people my age. It's not standard, Mark said. I've dealt with banks for 20 years. This is like they think someone is trying to steal your money. Someone was. Caroline listened from the doorway, arms folded, face composed. When I hung up, she didn't ask for drama. She asked for truth. "What exactly is happening with your finances?" she said. I gave her the simple version, the version that fit in a kitchen, not a courtroom. Papers after the funeral, pressure to sign. The bank refusing to speak to anyone but me. Caroline nodded once. "And you're letting them feel that, aren't you?" "I'm letting them learn I'm not helpless," I said. I never was. Sunday morning brought the third call. Lisa's voice sounded worn down, like she hadn't slept. "Mom, you have to come home today," she said. "This is out of control. They're not just blocking changes now. Mark can't even see your balances." I pictured him, locked out of the dashboard he'd been using like a leash. "Then I guess I'll need to handle it myself," I said. "When are you coming back?" Mark demanded, impatience cutting through his usual polish. "This afternoon," I said. "I'll be home by dinner." "Good," Lisa said quickly, relief and anger tangled together. "Because we scheduled an emergency appointment with the bank manager for Monday morning, 9 o'clock. We need to fix this before it affects anything else." Of course they scheduled it. Of course they wanted to be in the room when I spoke. They still believed they could steer me if they stood close enough. "What time?" I asked, even though she'd just told me. 9, Mark repeated. "Don't worry, Lisa and I will be there to help explain the situation." I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. They didn't understand that the bank manager already acted on my instructions, written in my hand, stored behind steel, dated and deliberate. Suddenly they needed me for more than money. Monday morning came with crisp October light that made everything look sharper than I wanted. I dressed like myself on purpose. Navy slacks, a white blouse, Robert's pearl earrings. Professional without looking like I expected a courtroom. Mark and Lisa were waiting in my driveway when I got back from the grocery store. Lisa hurried to my trunk, cheerful in that practiced way. "Mom, thank goodness," she said. "This bank mess has been a nightmare. Mark barely slept. Mark didn't look tired from sleep. He looked tired from losing. His eyes kept drifting to my purse, like it contained the one thing he couldn't argue his way into." "What exactly happened while I was gone?" I asked. "Technical difficulties," Mark said. "Some security glitch that triggered when we tried to update your beneficiaries." A glitch. A convenient word for the rules worked. We drove to the Bank of Millfield for our 9 o'clock meeting. Lisa filled the car with reassurance. How lucky we were. How confusing banks can be. How I shouldn't worry my heart with details. Mark held a folder in his lap like a shield. I watched the town roll by and repeated a quiet phrase I'd started reclaiming, my own. Inside the lobby, the smell of carpet cleaner and old paper hit me the way it always had. A young teller looked up, smiled, and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell," like my name still belonged to me. Mark flinched at that, just slightly, and I stored it away. Tom Morrison stood when we entered his office. He shook my hand warmly, then nodded at Mark and Lisa with polite distance. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "I understand there's been confusion over the weekend." "Confusion is one way to put it," Mark replied, settling into the chair across from Tom. "We've been helping Margaret manage her finances for years. Now I can't even access basic information." Tom didn't debate feelings. He opened a thick folder and set a yellow legal pad on top. Fresh lines, a pen ready. "Before we start," he said, "I'm going to verify identity. Mrs. Mitchell, may I see 2 forms of ID?" Lisa blinked. Mark's posture stiffened. I handed over my driver's license and a credit card. Tom checked, nodded, and wrote a few words on the pad. "Here's what happened," he said. "Friday afternoon, we received requests for beneficiary changes on 3 investment accounts, adding an authorized user to 2 checking accounts and an inquiry into safe deposit box access records." Lisa's eyes widened. Mark's jaw tightened. "All of those requests," Tom continued, "came from someone other than the account holder. using general power of attorney documentation that was not verified through our standard protocols. Those are normal estate planning updates, Mark said quickly. Margaret approved them. We discussed everything. Tom's pen paused. Discussed with whom? With Margaret, Mark snapped. Then he softened, performing concern. She knows. Tom looked directly at me. Mrs. Mitchell, were you aware that someone attempted to change beneficiaries and add new authorized users on Friday? The question was simple. That's what made it deadly. No, I said. I was in Riverside visiting my sister. I did not authorize any transactions while I was away. Lisa's face went pale. Mark's mouth opened, then shut. Tom nodded once. 6 weeks ago, you asked for enhanced security. You told me you were concerned about unauthorized access. You also gave specific instructions for situations like this. I remember, I said. Mark leaned forward. What instructions? Tom kept his eyes on me. You asked us to keep sealed documentation in your safe deposit box, box 247, to be opened if someone tried to override your account controls. Mrs. Mitchell, before I retrieve it, are you comfortable continuing this meeting with Mr. Keller and Miss Mitchell present? Mark turned to me with that patient smile, the one meant to make everyone doubt my mind instead of his motives. Margaret, he said gently, you don't remember giving the bank special instructions, do you? You've been overwhelmed. It's easy to forget meetings. This was his last attempt to make my memory the problem. I remember exactly what I told Tom, I said, and I'd like to review it now. It's not an error when someone follows instructions. Tom left the office. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was revealing. Lisa whispered, Mom, what is this? It's me protecting my accounts, I said, from anyone who thinks a family is a substitute for permission. Tom returned with a woman in a gray blazer. Sarah Chen, she introduced herself. Compliance. In her hands was a manila envelope with my name written across the front in blue ink, my handwriting, my slant, my spacing. Mark went still the moment he saw it, like he'd just realized the game had been recorded. Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah said, placing it on Tom's desk. Policy requires a witness when opening sealed customer instructions. Do you want Mr. Keller and Miss Mitchell to remain in the room? Yes, I said. They should hear this. Sarah slid a letter opener under the flap. The sound was soft, paper parting, glue giving way. But the room felt suddenly airless. 3 handwritten pages came out, along with copies I'd tucked behind them. Tom read in silence. Sarah read over his shoulder, making notes that were all business and no mercy. Tom finally looked up. Your instructions are clear. You documented financial pressure from family members, repeated attempts to gain control, and the use of urgency after a funeral. Mark's voice cut in. This is insane. Sarah lifted a finger, calm as a traffic light. There's also a specific quote, she said, eyes on my page. A comment made at a funeral about being next in line for $5 million. Lisa made a small broken sound. Mark's face went white. That was a joke, Mark said. People say things at funerals. Mrs. Mitchell listed witnesses, Tom replied, still reading. And she documented a pattern. He turned a page. You also wrote that you feared someone might claim you lacked capacity if you resisted. Capacity. The word sat on the desk like a weight. My penmanship had never looked so official. Sarah nodded once. Your instructions request that any account changes require your physical presence, 2 forms of identification, and verbal confirmation from you alone. They also direct us to contact your attorney, Eleanor Hartwell, if anyone attempts to assert power of attorney over your finances. Eleanor's name landed like a locked door. Tom closed the letter carefully. Based on your instructions and the weekend's attempts, we've tightened security across all accounts. Going forward, all statements and communications return to you. Any changes happen only with you present. He glanced at Sarah, then back at me, and we will document the weekend's activity in our compliance records. Mark pushed back his chair. So you're treating us like criminals? I kept my voice level. I'm treating you like what you tried to do. You attempted to move my money while I was out of town. Lisa's eyes filled. Mom, we were trying to protect you. Protect me, I repeated softly. Or protect your plan. Tom turned back to me. Mrs. Mitchell, what would you like us to update today? My address, my phone, my email, I said, and remove any access that isn't mine. I watched Mark's hands flex against his folder as if he could crush paper into obedience, and in the middle of that sterile office, on paper in ink, was the thing he'd dismissed as harmless. Every word from the funeral was there in writing. The consequences started before we even left the bank. Tom Morrison went over the new protocols with the same calm he used for mortgage closings and fraud alerts. Professional, precise, unemotional. Powers of attorney were suspended pending legal review. Every authorized user except me was removed. Automatic transfers and bill pay arrangements that ran through Mark's oversight were canceled on the spot. Statements will be mailed directly to your home address, Tom said, pen moving across his legal pad. Online access will require new passwords only you know. Any future beneficiary, changes, or management updates require your physical presence. Verified ID, no exceptions. Sarah Chen, the compliance officer, added one line that landed like a door locking. And your file now includes your attorney's contact information for any irregular activity. Mark listened with the expression of someone watching 3 years of careful planning dissolve into air. Lisa stared at the desk, blinking hard as if she could will herself back into the version of this morning where she still believed they were helping. What about the trust updates? Lisa asked quietly. The will changes? Anything prepared without Mrs. Mitchell's informed consent is questionable, Sarah replied, diplomatic but final. She should review everything with her own counsel, not theirs. In the parking lot, Mark finally let his anger show. Margaret, he said, voice low, I hope you understand what you just did. You destroyed years of organization. You've made it impossible for us to help you when you really need it. When I really need it, I repeated. You mean when you need access? He stopped walking. How are we supposed to help you if we can't make decisions on your behalf? By asking what I want, I said, not deciding what you think I need. The drive home was quiet. Mark gripped the steering wheel as if he could squeeze the outcome into something different. Lisa sat in the back seat, sniffing, wiping tears with the sleeve of her sweater. I watched familiar streets pass the windows and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, ownership. Not just of accounts and documents, of myself. That evening, Lisa came to my house alone. She didn't sweep into the kitchen like she belonged there. She hovered in the doorway of my living room like a visitor, clutching a tissue, her eyes red. Mom, she said, when did you start planning all of this? The bank, the attorney, the letter. I didn't answer with anger. I answered with the truth I'd been swallowing for 3 years. The morning after Dorothy's funeral, I said, when I woke up and found Mark's name already typed into a power of attorney form on my table. Lisa flinched. I didn't decide you were my enemy, I continued. I realized you'd stopped seeing me as myself. Somewhere along the way, help turned into replacement. We were trying to protect you, she whispered. From what? I asked gently. From paying my own bills? From changing my mind? From living long enough to spend my own money? She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if she finally heard how the words sounded. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. Lisa, you stood in a room full of people while your husband joked about being next in line for money. And the next morning, you brought me papers that would have given him control over my life with a signature. A long silence filled the space between us. For the first time, she didn't have a prepared sentence. "What do you want from us now?" she asked, voice small. "I want you to be my daughter," I said, "not my manager. And I want Mark to remember he married into this family. He didn't buy it. And if we can't do that, then we'll have a polite relationship," I said, "the kind that doesn't require keys." Lisa's eyes welled again, but she didn't argue. She left without taking anything that night. No folders, no helpful plans, no sense of entitlement. After she drove away, I changed the locks. The locksmith didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He looked at my trembling hands, nodded once, and worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen this story before. The new normal settled in over the next weeks like furniture rearranged in a room you thought you knew. My mail came to my address again, envelopes with my name, not Mark's. My bank statements arrived on time, and when I called, people spoke to me like I was the customer. I wrote my passwords on a small card and hid it where only I would look. I cooked in my own kitchen without someone helping by reorganizing my cabinets. I kept my keys in my pocket and felt their weight the way you feel a pulse. Some trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself. But my house was mine again, and so was the life inside it. 6 weeks after the bank meeting, I found an apartment. I didn't need to move. The house was mine, legally, morally, and on every line of the bank's records. But the rooms still carried echoes. Mark's low voice on my couch, his folders stacked on my dining table, the way he'd turned my grief into a project plan. The apartment faced east. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen tile like someone had opened a curtain inside my chest. It wasn't fancy. It was clean, quiet, and, most importantly, untouched. A place where no one had ever told me we'll handle it while reaching for my keys. The lease had my name only. On moving day, I hired people who carried boxes without opinions. No one sighing about my confusing paperwork. No one intercepting my mail. No one explaining the world to me like I was a child. Just the soft scrape of tape, the thump of a couch against a hallway wall, and my own breathing, steady, for the first time in months. I kept the house, too. I didn't sell it. I didn't let it go. I just stopped living inside a memory that other people tried to monetize. I turned the old place into something practical. A locked property with cameras, lights on timers, and a single set of keys that never left my purse. Every Tuesday afternoon, I sat at my new table with a pen that stayed where I put it. I balanced my checkbook the way I always had, slow, careful, and mine. The bank alerts pinged my phone the second anything moved. I had my statements delivered to a P.O. box, and I gave the bank a no third-party changes note that lived on my profile like a scar that finally had a name. One evening, my phone buzzed with Lisa's number. I watched it ring twice before I answered. "Mom," she said quietly. No rehearsed warmth, no manager voice, just a daughter trying to remember how to be one. "I'm here," I replied. She didn't apologize perfectly. She didn't suddenly become someone new. But she asked before she spoke, and she listened when I said, "No." It was a small thing, almost invisible, until you've lived without it. The next Sunday, I drove to Dorothy Halloway's grave with a mug of coffee and a small bouquet of violets. I told her out loud that I remembered what Mark said in that fellowship hall. I told her I was sorry it took that moment to wake me up. When I got home, I set my keys on the counter and smiled at the sound they made, metal on wood, solid and final. Some people think money talks, but paperwork has the final word. 6 months later, I sat at my small kitchen table with Robert's favorite mug warming my hands. The trust statements arrived on schedule. The alerts on my phone stayed quiet. My name sat alone on every account, every lease, every line that mattered. And in the silence, I finally heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. My own instincts, without anyone talking over them. Grief hadn't made me incompetent. It had made me vulnerable. There was a difference. I learned that help isn't someone taking over your mail, your keys, your passwords, your voice. Real help asked first. Real help left you in charge. Anything else was just access wearing a smile. I kept my receipts, I kept my boundaries, and I kept one rule taped inside my planner. If they rush you, it's not for your benefit. If this story hit a nerve, don't just swallow it and move on. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the first small thing you ignored that later became a big warning? Your answer might be the exact sentence another person needs to read tonight. And if you know someone who's being managed by family, shared mail, just sign here, sudden pressure, secret paperwork, please share this with them, quietly if you have to, safely. Lastly, if you're watching and you're scared, you're not overreacting. Call your bank yourself. Ask about account notes, alerts, and third-party restrictions. Talk to an elder law attorney. If you ever feel coerced, reach out to local adult protective services or a trusted professional, because the most dangerous predators don't always look like strangers. I didn't win because I yelled. I won because I stopped signing my life away. And no stayed a complete sentence.